Today we're replacing the front motor mount behind the radiator in a 2010 Cadillac DTS. This should be the same process for Cadillac 2006 through 2010 DTS. Here we go. The first thing that we did was remove that black splash guard, which is immediately up under the Cadillac. It is held in by several plastic black clips that sort of look like rivets. They're easily removed with a screwdriver and a dike. Here are the clips that we removed to get the splash guard off. It also connects to the side of the splash guard on the inner fender in the wheel well, and we removed it with these tools here and a screwdriver, flathead. Next we removed the air box, which didn't require much of any tools at all. This was removed with a 8mm and or a screwdriver, and then this piece here was just with a black plastic clip that you squeeze on and pull it off, and you take the air box off and just put it on the side of the house or out of the way so you don't step on it or break it. Next in the process is taking the bolts off of the cross member, which is directly between the engine and the radiator. So we removed all of these bolts here, and then big 15mm bolts. There's 4 of them that are on the back side that we removed out. Alright, the next thing that we did was we removed the hood latch support from the cross member, which proved to be a little bit tricky. What we had to do is take out the bolts on the inside behind the grill and the bolts that were actually connected to the cross member. Then underneath we had to push up on the radiator to be able to get this up and over the cross member, because it was actually latched over the side here. So that was the tricky part, and now we're going to remove the actual cross member, and this will allow us some elbow room to get down to that grimy, old, busted motor mount. It's the front of the engine, but it's technically the side of the engine, because you got to remember that the North Star is in the engine bay sideways. Alright, so the next step here is to remove the 2 bolts that attach to the motor and the plate, which sits on top of the motor mount. They're a little bit hard and tricky to get to, but they're on the side of the engine here. And there's 2 of them, and they are a 15mm? 15mm. We're actually mental giants, so it took us getting through the first bolt to realize that a ratcheting wrench with a swivel flex head worked a little bit easier to get the second bolt out, so that would also ring true for the first bolt. Alright, so now we're going to go underneath. We're going to put a piece of wood on top of the hydraulic jack, and the purpose of that is to keep the weight of the vehicle, or the weight of the engine rather, evenly distributed, so that you don't poke a hole in the bottom of your engine pan or your oil pan. Alright, before we begin, first thing you want to do is put a chalk behind the rear tire, put your emergency brake on so the car doesn't roll. Then we're going to jack up the vehicle and put it on jack stands just to have a little bit more working room underneath the vehicle. You always have to be concerned about room for activities when doing these types of jobs.
Extra room for activity.
So we're just going to jack up the motor, and what that should do, if we got this right, is it should separate this plate right here where we just took the 2 bolts off. It should separate that from the motor itself, and the motor mount itself is underneath this plate, so we want to separate the 2 there. Alright, and so next up is to remove these 2 bolts that are on the underbelly of the Cadillac. These are also attached to the plate that surrounds the motor mount that Buddha will point to right there. So after we remove the 2 bolts down at the bottom, now when we're jacking up the from the oil pan with the hydraulic jack, you can now see that the plate separates, and now we should be able to gain some pretty easy access to that motor mount down there.
Alright, stop recording. I think I'm going to take this.
We decided to take off this motor mount so that there's less resistance when we jack up the motor. So you see that that's just 2 bolts, and that thing easily just comes disengaged from the motor and the unibody or whatever the hell that's connected to. Alright, so let's reapproach here. We were jacking up the motor from underneath, again using that block of wood, and we can see clear separation between the motor mount plate and the motor itself, and there's a motor mount down there, and we should be able to get to that pretty easily now. Alright, so I'll try to show you this as best we can here, but the new motor mount is in, but you can see on the back side of the top backside of this plate, there was another bolt that was quite the bastard to get off, actually. It took a long time because you got to take some really small turns with your ratchet, but we did get it off. This piece just eventually does slide up, as you can see, off, and then the motor mount, well, you can actually just grab it and pull it up quite easily between the exhaust manifold and the fans here. If you really want more room, you can opt to take the fans off, but we didn't have to. We just sort of pulled back on the fans and easily pulled the motor mount right out of there. Drop the new one in, put the plate back on. Now we're going to put that bolt back on the top, and then the 2 underneath on the bottom. Word. Alright, so we have these 2 bolts back on, and the nut that is down there now, you can barely see it. I'll try to focus. It's on top of the motor mount itself, is on. And down underneath there are 3 fasteners that have securely been fastened. And we lowered the engine back down. The car is still on stands at this point, though. Next up, put the front side motor mount back on and tighten it up. Alright, so now the cross member goes back on. You got to kind of pull back on the front clip of the vehicle so that the supports are out of the way. These here have a tendency to get in the way. Alright. And these just go backing up over the cross member. Alright, now that these hood latch supports are back on, remember you have to push up on the bottom of the radiator, so it's kind of a 2-man job to get this to hook back over the cross member. And now we just put the cross member bolts back in. These were 15 millimeter. Alright, and once the airbox is back together, everything's tightened up. Make sure that all of the clamps and electrical units are hooked back up, as well as the little aluminum latches down there. Then you put your aesthetic cover back on the top. Your plastic piece here up in the front. Make sure you just, put these back in, snap it in, and you're pretty much good to go. Basically, you just reverse all of the steps that we created here to get back to where you were, and we got this thing running right. It's nice and smooth.